Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Amma ba'da, habati fillah. Habati fillah. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's beautiful creation. There's bats in here. This is a bat cave. And we have to be thankful and grateful for the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Amma ba'da, habati fillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa sallallahu kareem. رب العرش العظيم أن يتولنا في الدنيا والآخرة. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Almighty, accepts our good and forgives our evil, protects us from kulli su' wa makruh. May Allah bless us all with ikhlas wa thabat ala sunnat nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. May Allah tabarak wa ta'ala forgive us all and bless us to be better slaves of His subhanahu wa ta'ala. Habati fillah. As Muslims, we know we are supposed to represent excellence. Well, we represent excellence, and that means we're representing Islam, which is the revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ahabati fillah, as I mentioned, that we all possess a culture. We all have various cultural backgrounds, Muslim and non-Muslim. And that affects how we practice Islam. No matter how many people say, yes, we adhere to the Quran and the Sunnah, there's no doubt that we are all affected and we practice the book and the Sunnah, but we are affected by our cultural background. You cannot be, there goes a roadrunner, mashallah. You cannot be completely away from what you were raised from, your understanding, even certain ways of communication, certain mannerisms, and so forth. But as a Muslim, you are trying to hone in your mannerisms, your attitudes, perspectives in accordance with the book and the Sunnah and the methodology of the Salaf of this ummah. And so, with that being the case, ahabati fillah, that is something all of us have to strive for. And that is to rid ourselves of the negative attitudes, ideologies, ways of thinking that contradict the book and the Sunnah. And this is where difficulty sets in. For example, I've seen many scenarios where sometimes believers in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even marrying from different parts of the world, totally different cultural backgrounds. And this is beautiful. This is what Islam, in fact, the Nusus seem to encourage us to step outside of our culture, to go and marry for the Muslim culture, meaning the Islamic culture, better yet. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that He created us in nations and tribes لِتَعَرَّفُوا, in order that we get to know one another. You know, so that not that we despise and have hatred for one another. Islam calls us to unify. But what happens because of our backgrounds, because of our rhetoric, because of what way we were raised in our households, sometimes even the believers, I know countless scenarios of people marrying and almost always ending in a divorce, especially when there's racism involved, where there was racism in the marriage, meaning that, for example, and it seems that in many times I've seen it from the women's side, that there will be a woman, she's maybe European and she marries African American, or a woman, she's Saudi, she marries Somali, or a woman, she's such and such culture and she marries such and such culture. And pure racism and arrogance will be manifested in the relationship until there is divorce. There cannot be humiliation in marriage. That is not respect. And that is not the mawadda, the love and the mercy Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places in the marriage. So the people go away from the maqsad. But you have to question, why did they marry in the first place? If someone has these, a lot of times, unfortunately, through the relationship, those things manifest themselves. You will see the racism, you will see the ugliness, you will see their prejudices after being married. And the reason I'm highlighting this as a practical example that we've witnessed countless times is because not only does it hurt the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the unity, but it also is a contradiction of the book and the sunnah, the culture that we're supposed to have. So that doesn't mean, another extreme that I find when it comes to people having Islamic culture or believing they have Islamic culture, is sometimes the people, and this kind of ties into what we just said, is because they have an idea of what everything should be like instead of living life as a human being does and as a relationship has and grows, that they have no tolerance for one another. And so this is where the prejudice and the racism comes. We don't say allow sin, but if you have you have cultural background, everybody has cultural background, but if you have certain habits, certain practices, as long as they don't contradict the book and the sunnah, as long as they are not sinful, then there's no problem. But people don't always understand this, and I think this comes from ignorance, and it comes from a lack of tolerance and perspective. And so this is another problem we find. And so as Muslims, we are striving our best to actualize Islam. And as reverts to Islam especially, whether we're just trying to practice Islam to the best of our ability, then we have less, we tend to find within the Quran and the Sunnah, or what we read and what we understand from the Quran and the Sunnah, we have this tasawwur, we have this outlook on how to practice Islam. And so as Muslims, we should be striving to elevate ourselves and practice Islam in accordance with the book and the Sunnah, not in accordance with our culture. And this leads to another issue when people say, you know, I'm African American first, then I'm Muslim. I'm Somali first, then I'm Muslim. I'm tribal, I'm Navajo first, and then I'm Muslim. I'm white, I'm a white American, I'm a Caucasian, I'm European, I'm Irish first, and I am also Muslim. No, that doesn't negate that you're Irish. It doesn't negate that you're African American. Islam doesn't negate that you're Somali. But rather, your Islam takes priority. Why? Because you're being Somali, you're being African American, you're being white is not going to save you from the hellfire. It's not going to bring you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and ultimately we're going to drop you in the grave. And you're not going to be questioned about how well you practice the rituals of the Rehamar, how excellent of an Oromo, were you for Oromo independence or not? Were you a black revolutionary or civil rights warrior or not? These things are not going to be asked of you, but rather you're going to be asked, Men Rabbuk, who's your Lord? Ma Dinik, what is your religion? Men Nabiyak, and who is your prophet? And you had better have the right answer, and that is only going to come by, while you practice in this dunya, you're practicing Islam. You're striving to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your Islam. So this is imperative for us, ahabati fillah, to know and understand that we are ordered to practice our Islam. And even a last point I want to mention, because a lot of people misunderstand this. Sometimes you find this, especially from reverts, is they want to throw away every aspect of their culture. No, Islam does not call you to that. Islam calls you to discard that which contradicts your culture. So, for example, we can't, like the Word Deen community, we can't say, well, you know, we are, you know, our music and our cultural dance or whatever, that this is more, this is a part of who we are as Muslim, and so we have to practice. No, because of that music and the cultural dance, especially if it's out in public, it's not between you and the husband and wife or whatever, then this is not something which Islam condones for a variety of reasons. So that way you would discard that, because Islam is first. And the fuqaha, the scholars of fiqh and jurisprudence, they mention a qaida, a principle, and that is al-ada muhakkama, that the ada, or the culture, it is to be taken in making rulings, you could say. Let's give you an example that'll make it much clearer. So, for example, in Islam, there is no real clear evidence about the distance for what a traveler is. So, for example, if something is not spelled out or explicit in the Quran and or Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, or the ijma, consensus of the Salaf, or those after them, then Islam, the fuqaha, have deduced that we return to the Arabic language for understanding, and we return also to the ada, the habit. So, for example, in the example of safar, or traveling, since Islam does not, there's no strong evidence to support that there's a specific distance to consider one a traveler. Even though the scholars, they differ, and they do have they have different opinions on it, but it's not muhkam, okay? It's not fully determined or strong in that evidence. And if we return to the Arabic language, we find that also, since it's not in the book in the Sunnah, and it's not spelled out, you know, there's no consensus about it, then, and if we return to the Arabic language and we see safar, the word safar, we, you know, to travel, we don't see that it's defined by any distance. Then we've now returned to the language. Now we return to the ada. And this was Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, and I believe Imam Malik, rahimahumullah jami'an, and Imam Malik much before Imam Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, obviously, rahimahumullah jami'an. And so you go to the ada, the custom, meaning that the way that you determine whether you're a traveler or not is what the local people, what is their custom. So if you live amongst the Bamboudi Pygmies, and you are going to, maybe you've been doing dawah there, okay? And that's in, that would probably be northwestern Africa, I think, where Bamboudis, you know, what's left of their cultures and so forth. Say you were doing dawah there, and you were going to leave the village to go to a main city somewhere. Well, you would use what the local people determine as traveling. You know, maybe for them, because they're not using much transportation, they're on foot, they hunt elephants and with bows and arrows, that, you know, they're gauging travel by walking. So then, whatever their distance that they consider, oh yeah, this is I'm a traveler, I go from here and here to hunt elephants, that this is the distance, or this is the amount of time, you go with the custom. That's the point. You go to the custom. So do not negate culture, O ayyuhal muslimun. And those are the last things I want to say. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Almighty, to accept our good and forgive our evil, protect us from kulli suwa makruh, bless us with ikhlas, with thabat ala sunnat nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. And until our next sitting, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, billah at-tawfiq.